Hello everybody. Wanted to do a video about running 100-mile distances in Xero shoes and Xero sport sandals and huaraches. I've done 15 official 100-mile races, but I had never run one in shoes the entire way until Mother's Day weekend about 6 weekends ago. I wore the Xero HFS road shoes. The weather was interesting that weekend. Polar vortex made a comeback in the weather news. And so it was quite a bit colder than we would have expected for that weekend. So for a 100-mile run from our house here in Beaver Creek, Ohio to Loveland, Ohio, and back via the Xenia bike station, all on the bike trail. To keep my feet warm, I wore these the entire way with a thin pair of socks, and they were perfect. I had absolutely no issues with abrasions. Again, as always, no blisters, and there was just enough cushion there, just a little bit of cushion on the thin outsole to keep my feet feeling pretty good the entire way. A few weeks prior to that, I ran my wife's race. She ran a marathon in lieu of the Boston Marathon being canceled. So I went out and ran a relatively quick, for me, marathon in the Xero Speed Force, and they were fantastic, phenomenal. Again, that was all on paved blacktop bike trail. With the pandemic and how most races have been canceled, of course, that's shaken up my routine quite a bit. So I had a kind of a last-minute idea to run another do-it-yourself 100-mile race this past weekend. I call it a race loosely. Two of us ran it. Again, same two that ran the Beaver Creek to Loveland 100-miler back over Mother's Day weekend. And of course the weather was warmer. The run started in Springfield, Ohio, and was a point-to-point 100-mile distance on the Little Miami Scenic Trail, roughly 78 miles. We covered the entire trail and then ran various paths and roads to Cincinnati. Climbed, ran up to the top of the what's called the Mount Adams Steps, and got to see the bridges we were then going to run over, at least some of them. So we went back down into downtown Cincinnati riverfront, ran 3 different bridges over to Kentucky, and with the final bridge back to Cincinnati, we were on a bridge that once was the original bridge built after the Civil War. Coming over that bridge represented freedom. And so now we finished our 100-mile race at the Freedom Center on the Cincinnati side of the Ohio River. That's the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. The run was a fundraiser for the NAACP Legal and Education Fund. Legal defense. So anyhow, for the first 44 miles of this past weekend's run, I ran in the Xero Genesis. Of course, they're very thin, more of a hard rubber, and that was by far the furthest I'd ever run in the Genesis. I guess it was 2 years ago when these were relatively new to me. 1 week after running my PR at the C&O Canal 100. I finished it on a Sunday. The next Sunday I ran the Flying Pig Marathon in Cincinnati in these. So I knew I could do at least a marathon in these, but for the first 44 miles of a 100-mile run, I ran in these. I think I could have gone further, but I didn't want to push beyond that. My feet were getting pretty tender, and so I switched to my newest pair of Xero Z-Trails for miles 44 to 77. And of course, these are pretty thin and very lightweight, but they had just a little bit of cushion and I applied basically like a body glide product to my feet and to the inside of the strap lacing on the sandals as well, just to keep that skin from feeling dried out. And I applied the product to the balls of my feet, right where they make contact, right here primarily for most of the running. And that took the edge off the sensitivity in my feet. I had some hot spots, nothing too bad. And anyways, these were fantastic. I probably could have finished out the 100 miles in these. I wasn't sure if that might slow me down or not, and I was running with a faster runner. So at 77 miles, I switched into my trusty proven HFS from Xero shoes, the road shoe. I already knew I could run 100 miles in these, and it was cooler and dark, so I slipped these on to finish up just over, to get me up to over 100 miles. And of course, they were pretty cushy and comfy. I sort of wish I had a little bit thinner pair of socks. My toes felt just a little crowded. Of course, that was just a sizing issue. I probably could have worn these without socks. I just hadn't experimented enough to take that risk. We made up race bibs for this, called it the Justice 100. It was a really cool route. If anybody in the Southern Ohio area is considering a 100-mile point-to-point run, this was a pretty cool route. It was pretty neat to be kind of in the green tunnel on the bike trail for the first 77 miles, and then into some dark running before we got into Cincinnati downtown. The sun had come up. So really cool to finish with the big city vibe. So much color, so much to see, up to the top of Mount Adams, small mountain, and then over the extra wide Ohio River on different bridges into Kentucky. Just a lot to see. It was a perfect way to finish that out. So now I have 15 official 100-mile races finished, plus 2 of my do-it-yourself 100-milers. I kept track of the GPS distance on my Sunto watch and kind of documented with photography along the way. There are YouTube videos on both of those runs, and at least one blog up on one of those runs. Worth noting, after all 17 of those 100-mile completions, and after several, I think at least 3, maybe 4 DNFs at the 100-mile distance, where those runs were anywhere from about 100K to 99 miles, where I did not get to the finish. There were no real blisters or injuries after any of those races. I credit in part the minimalist footwear for being able to do that. So hey, thank you for watching. Subscribe, check out my blog, and keep running, keep trying new things, keep experimenting. Cheers.